I came with a message today to just say that no life is so shattered, sheltered, or shamed that it cannot be a vehicle of God's grace. Amen? All right, and by God's grace, I mean the power of transforming love. So no life is so shattered, sheltered, or shamed that it cannot be a vehicle of transforming love, of love beyond belief. Now, how do we know this? First of all, we can just look at the Bible and the people that it says that God chose to bring love and light and justice to the world. Who do we have? We have people like Jacob, who cheated his brother and lied to his father. Moses, who was a murderer. Joseph, who was arrogant. Rahab, who was a prostitute. King David, who was an adulterer. There's Peter, Paul, and Mary Magdalene. The list goes on and on and on. And it reminds us that transforming love, that God's grace does not just come from people with good pedigrees, or the wealthy, or the saints who live lives of moral perfection. Every life can be and is meant to be a source of transforming love. But we don't have to look even to the Bible to see this. I can look at my own life story, and you could probably look at yours. All right? Just as you haven't always been the person that you are today, I haven't always been the person that I am today. And when I sing Amazing Grace, as we did a little bit earlier, when I sing the words, I was lost, but now I'm found, I raise my voice a little bit because I know what that feels like. I was blind, but now I see. Now here in the Unitarian Universalist hymnal, we give people a choice. They could say, Amazing Grace that saved a soul like me, or a wretch like me, which is the original words. Now, I sing wretch because I've been a wretch. Now, I know that not everybody does, because when they weren't a wretch, they were told by their church they were a wretch, and they're sick of singing about being a wretch when they don't feel like they deserve to say that. In my case, I'm in touch with my inner wretch. And I think we all need to be in touch with our inner wretch. Now, most people who know me, they see me as a successful minister with a beautiful family who graduated from Harvard and has an honorary doctorate from Phillips Theological Seminary. But I certainly wasn't always that way. If you've been part of this church for a while, you've heard me say from time to time, I talk about some of my early years of drug use and addiction. People who've been down that kind of road before know that when you are addicted, it usually means that you're also living a double life, which means that you're lying and cheating and stealing and dealing and doing whatever else you need to do in order to not get caught and to keep feeding the insanity of the addictive behavior. For years, I didn't talk about this period of my life very much because I didn't want people to judge me now for the way I was then. Many of us live with some part of our life story that we're afraid to or are ashamed of, and because we're afraid that we're going to get labeled or judged or misunderstood now for how we were then. Often what's really going on, though, is that we haven't fully accepted ourselves, or at least some part of ourselves. So to lift this up today, I want us to look at a story, a Bible story that frustrates most people. It's the story of the prodigal son, which is a parable that Jesus told, and we find in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. Why does it frustrate people? Because it seems unfair. It's the story of two sons of a wealthy landowner, and one of the sons says to his father that he wants his inheritance now instead of waiting for his father to die. Now, that's basically telling your father that I wish you were dead so that I could have what's mine and that I could start living now how I want to without having to deal with you as my father. And for whatever reason, the father says okay and gives him half of everything he has. The son goes off and sells the land and the property that he has, and he goes and blows all the money on partying and prostitutes and living a wild life. Until one day he finds himself out of money, out of friends, and out of luck. He ends up taking the only job he can find, which is one of the worst jobs you can get if you're a Jew. He's taking care of pigs, considered an unclean animal. And he's so hungry and he's so desperate some days that he finds himself longing to eat from the seed pods and the slop that he's feeding the pigs. He finally decides, this sucks. He says, my own father's servants live better than this. I might as well just go back to him and see if he'll just let me be one of his servants. And so he plans the whole thing. He comes up with a speech in his head about having sinned against heaven and his family and how he's not worthy of being anything more than his father's servant. And then when he makes it to the edge of his father's land and he's still a safe distance away, he's probably getting up the nerve and practicing his lines when his father sees him and he runs out to greet him with open arms. Before he can say very much, his father has his arms around him, big smile on his face, and he's telling his servants to go get his best robe to put on his son and his ring and to go kill the fattened calf because we're going to have a celebration. My son was dead and now he's alive. He was lost and now he's found. So far it sounds pretty good. If you're someone who knows what it's like to have betrayed someone you love, or if you've ever done anything seriously selfish or self-destructive, or if you've ever lost everything, including your own pride and dignity. Now, I have to believe that most people have done something. They can relate to this on some level, this prodigal son. Who among us has not done something foolish at some point in our lives that we're embarrassed about? Who has not maybe chased a dream that didn't work out, or become overcome by a reckless desire or compulsion and hurt others or ourselves? Who has not at some point done something that made you feel ashamed of yourself? Well, circling back around to the parable, the celebration's going on, and the dutiful son hears the music. He's out in the field working, as he has been every day of his life. And he heads home to see what's happening. And when he realizes what's going on, he's beside himself. How in God's name can his father be putting on a party and killing the fattened calf for this no-good loser of a brother who's done nothing right and has degraded their family's name, their family's reputation, and fortune? All these years, he, the dutiful son, has been doing what he's told, doing what a son is supposed to do. And his dad has never thrown him such a party, never even given him and his friends a goat, let alone a fattened calf. Most of us can relate on some level to the anger and the resentment of the dutiful son. The father should be throwing him a party, it seems, after all he's done. We feel the injustice of this story, that the good son, quote unquote, is getting the shaft. He's sacrificed, and he's been constant, and he's shown up, and he's done what he's supposed to do. He has his longings, he has his desires, he has the things he'd like to do instead, but he showed up. And anyone with a sense of right and wrong would agree. I'd be furious if I'd done everything that my dad asked me to do and my brother went off and did what the prodigal son did, and then my dad treats my brother like some kind of a hero. Wouldn't you? Seriously, wouldn't you? Now, I know most of us say that we think everyone has inherent worth and dignity, but let's get real. In practical terms, we think people need to earn it too. We can say that we believe in unconditional love, but if we're honest, in most of our relationships, our love is pretty darn conditional. If someone drags our reputation through the dirt, and is immoral and not trustworthy. And after a while, it's hard not to judge them and to withdraw from them. So let's not get all churchy in here and pretend like we don't understand the attitude of the dutiful son. If we're honest, we all have to admit that we can be pretty judgmental, pretty unforgiving, and dare I say, even self-righteous sometimes. One of the reasons this is such a popular and frustrating story is that we can all relate on some level with both of the sons. And in many ways, they represent two parts of ourselves. We all have this sibling rivalry going on within us all the time. One of the reasons that forgiveness is so hard for most of us is that we all have a dutiful, judgmental son living right inside of us. We have that part of us that knows right from wrong, and we want wrongs punished, and we want those who do right to be rewarded. And yet, the reason we all need forgiveness in the first place is the fact that we all have a little bit of the prodigal son in us too. Some of us more than others. We all need a little mercy and grace sometimes, amen? So why does Jesus tell us this story? Because Jesus is trying to teach us something about God and something about ourselves. The Father in the story represents God. In other words, the Father is the representation of transforming love. One of the reasons that I appreciate this story is that it's the first time in the Bible that God is depicted as loving unconditionally. Up until this point in the Bible, God is represented as wrathful and punishing and judging, and his love is very conditional on what the people do or don't do. Luke, we find out in this parable, is a universalist. And so we discover was Jesus. In this parable, the Father is shown to love both of his sons. We are being shown about God's love, that it is big enough to embrace all of us, our righteous sides as well as the parts of us that do wrong. And what this story is trying to teach us about ourselves is that until you and I embrace both parts of ourselves, those things within us that both judge us and do wrong, we will not know how to offer forgiveness. What I like about the Father, this image of transforming love, is that he tells the bad boy, so to speak, that he's waiting for him every single day of his life, not caring what he's done, only caring that he'll come back to love and what's right. This is a parable that speaks of a very loving God, or God as love. And it invites us to welcome and accept all parts of ourselves. Now, because when we learn to embrace our full selves, when we learn to embrace the whole of our story, we also learn how to forgive. Now, I know a marriage that broke up because one of the spouses was dishonest and deceitful for many years. In this case, it was the wife. And the husband has not been able to forgive her, even though they've been divorced for over a decade. I asked him if I could share this story, and he said, fine, they don't even live in Tulsa, so you don't know him if you think you do. At first, when I asked him why he couldn't forgive her, he explained that he was too deeply hurt by the betrayal and the deception, and because of how long it went on. When he finally found out about it, I asked why he was letting something like this that was so far in his past eat away at his happiness today, and why he's giving her and the situation so much rent up in his head for so many years. One day he finally admitted to me and to himself that he was placing all of his anger on his ex-wife, but that underneath it, he was beginning to realize who he was also really angry with the most and who he couldn't forgive, which was himself, for not seeing it and for letting it happen for so long. And now for letting his anger and resentment eat away at his life for so long. He was in touch with that part of himself that is like the dutiful brother in the parable, feeling self-righteous and betrayed, not just towards his ex-wife, but also towards himself. To come to forgive his spouse, he would have to admit that he too had failed, and he too had made some mistakes, that he too had some of the prodigal son in him, some shame and some embarrassment and some failure. But he was not able to greet that part of himself with open arms. It's so much easier to stay in the mode of the judgmental son because we like to feel superior. It's energizing. But we also end up missing out on the party that's going on all around us. This parable can teach us many different things, of course, like all the parables. But for today, I hope it reminds us that we all have this sibling rivalry within us, and that we need to learn to be more like the Father and embrace all parts of ourselves with love. Because such love is transforming, and it is from this love and the experience of it that we can then forgive and become vehicles of a love beyond belief. Now, if you're in this church at this time in its history, I'm going to guess that in some way you are in the process of bringing together parts of yourself into a greater sense of wholeness and integrity. Why do I say that? I say it because that's what's happening on all levels of this church right now. From the macro and the societal level to the very personal and individual level. There's a coming together into integrity and unity and wholeness that I've never seen before. There's a concept in science, I think it's called isotropic, where it says that in a system, whatever's happening at one level in the system is also happening at every other level in the system. So at All Souls right now, at the most macro level, there's a powerful coming together of the human family. Look around. There's a coming together across races and cultures like never before in this church. And in some ways, like it's never happened before in this city. We're also coming together rich and poor, gay and straight, people who believe in God, people who don't believe in God, and people who aren't sure if they believe in God. Christians and Jews and Buddhists and atheists and more. And as this is happening, it's not just creating an incredible healing on this larger level, but also on a very personal and individual level in most of our lives. Dare I say, in your life. And so on an individual level, we are bringing together parts of ourselves that have been separated and alienated from themselves. We are working to bring together our minds and our hearts and our bodies in worship and in the rest of our lives. We are finding ways to embrace at the same time our shame and our pride, our feminine and our masculine parts of ourselves, the parts of us that are inclusive and accepting and say everybody's included in God's love, and the parts of ourselves that is prejudiced and feels superior and self-righteous. If you are in this church, then on some level, I have to believe that you are also on this journey of wholeness. I know it's been happening to me over the past few years. As I mentioned at the beginning of this message, regarding my own growing ability to embrace the parts of my own story that I still sometimes prefer to ignore or forget. Parts of my story that I've been ashamed of, but that are part of who I am. This is exactly what we're supposed to be doing with our lives and with our church. And it's about more than just the salvation of our own souls. It's about the salvation of the entire human family and the earth. So let's keep it real. Remember, I have not always been the person that you know today, and you have not always been who and where you are today. Whoever you are and wherever you are on your journey, you don't have to be ashamed about your life. Don't be ashamed about where you've come from or what you've been through. If you've been down in life and been picked back up, then you can give your testimony. because you've been tested. You can't have a testimony if you haven't been tested. All right, you know what I mean? I've been embarrassed and I've been embraced by a love beyond belief. I've been given trust after I had broken people's trust. Have you? Can you turn to somebody right now and say, I've been there. I've done that. I don't care what you've done. Turn to somebody and say, I don't care what you've done. And now say, God can use you. You can be a vessel of transforming love. You can stop being a phony. Let us see the real you. Whatever you've done, whatever you're doing, a powerful and transforming love is waiting every day with open arms for you to return to grace and to love. This love is waiting to embrace you and waiting for you to take this experience of being loved beyond belief and then sharing it with the world. So don't be too quick to turn your back on that boy who's using drugs or that spouse who made a mistake. When they come back, will you welcome them like the father in the story or like the dutiful brother? You are loved beyond belief, and you are meant to be a vessel of such love. So forgive as you have been forgiven, and go and sin no more. Amen.